So in the summer of 1834, the music teacher in the school, Elizabeth Harrison, has something of a nervous breakdown. Of course, in the 19th century, there was no such conception. She went to her home in East Cambridge, and after a few days there, the bishop came to see her, the Mother Superior came to see her, and Ms. Harrison decided in August to go back to the convent. The selectmen in Charlestown were outraged. They wanted to go and see Ms. Harrison and see for herself if she went back willingly. Now, why would the selectmen of Charlestown be so concerned about the health and safety of a young woman who was working at the convent school? It was because one of the most popular books of the 19th century was 6 Months in a Convent, which was a salacious tale about what went on behind the walls of convents. Maria Monk wrote another book, The Awful Disclosures of the Hotel Dieu Nunnery in Montreal, a salacious tale. And Maria Monk was not really a nun. She had only a brief exposure to a convent, but she wrote an extraordinary book that sold more than 300,000 copies before the Civil War, telling us what went on behind the convent walls, things that I won't repeat to you. The selectmen of Charlestown thought that the same thing might be happening at the convent school. And the 60 students at the convent school were mainly the daughters of upper-class Unitarians from Boston. They wanted their daughters to get a better education than was available to them in the public schools of Charlestown or Boston. At the convent school, they would learn music, they would learn French and other foreign languages, and these were things that were not available in the public schools. So there's a certain lower class resentment about the Unitarians sending their daughters to be educated, a certain fear about what's happening inside the convent. And then the Reverend Lyman Beecher comes to town. And Beecher was one of the great evangelists of the early 19th century. And he has an extraordinary family. His two daughters, Catherine Beecher and Harriet Beecher, have careers as women of letters. Catherine Beecher writes a book about how to be a good housekeeper, a book of home economics. Harriet Beecher marries one of her father's divinity students, Calvin Stowe, and as Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin in the early 1850s. In fact, before Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk was the best-selling book of the 19th century. And then the Reverend Beecher's son, Henry Ward Beecher, becomes one of the great American ministers of the late 19th century. But Reverend Lyman Beecher in the summer of 1834 wasn't thinking about his children and their careers. He was really thinking about the papist menace. And over a week in August, he gives a series of fiery sermons warning about the influx of Catholics into the United States and what this meant for American institutions. So essentially, you have these different factors coming together in August of 1834. Elizabeth Harrison leaving the convent, the awful disclosures of Maria Monk, the return of Lyman Beecher, and an influx of Irish Catholics into Boston that sets off this reaction in August of 1834 when 20,000 men go across the bridge into Charlestown and march up to Mount Benedict and confront the Mother Superior at the Ursuline Convent. They demand to see Elizabeth Harrison. The Mother Superior tells them to go away. No one is coming inside. But they say, we won't leave until we see her. She tells them they have no business being there. And then she says that the bishop has 20,000 Irishmen in the railroad camps around Cambridge who can come and dispatch this mob if they don't leave immediately. She can see that they're lighting torches and they have barrels of pitch that they're going to use to set the convent on fire. While she is delaying them at the front door, the sisters are taking the 60 students out the back to safety. And once they are all out to safety, the Mother Superior abandons her post and the mob sets fire to the convent. Great conflagration on Mount Benedict in what's now Somerville. And well, you may ask, why doesn't the fire department come? Well, many members of the mob were also members of the fire companies, and they're not there to put out the fire, they're there to start the fire, and the fire rages. Catholics are warned by the Protestant establishment as well as by the bishop to keep a low profile, but to protect themselves, guards are put around Harvard College. This is a moment when the entire town might explode, but fortunately, cooler heads prevail. The bishop doesn't want a general race war against Catholics, nor do the authorities in Boston want the entire town to be burned by pro and anti-Catholic mobs. A number of men are found who were participants in the mob that burned the convent. They are put on trial. They are all acquitted. The bishop is asked if he wants to rebuild the convent. He says no, he is going to leave the smoldering ruins there as a monument to the hypocrisy and to the intolerance of Bostonians to this newly arrived faith. And after this, there isn't great harmony between Catholics and Protestants, as Bishop Fenwick is not going to apologize to anyone. The sisters do try to reestablish their school in West Roxbury. They're unsuccessful in doing that, and they ultimately move to Canada, although later in the century, more nuns will come to educate the youths of Boston in a different time. The burning of the Ursuline Convent is one of the unforgettable moments in Boston history, and we're confronted at this moment between, on the one hand, we have the great aspirations of moral perfection being suggested by Elizabeth Palmer Peabody and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and on the other side, we have a mob of 20,000 people that will march across to destroy a school. It is, as are many other times in Boston, fascinating, terrible, and deeply moving, and teaches us a great deal about Boston and the human condition.